We're nearly into November, and the Heisman race is still anyone's game. There are 10 to 15 players that are still in the running for the Heisman Trophy, so today I'm going to be sharing my 10 players who I think have the best shot of winning the Heisman in December. Before we get to today's video, make sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you're watching this video, odds are that you love college football, and odds are you aren't subscribed to my channel, so make sure to subscribe to one of the best college football communities here on YouTube. Also, make sure to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm and helps share the video with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. We'll kick off today's list with Oklahoma State quarterback Spencer Sanders, who continues to have the best season of his career. He's thrown for over 2,000 yards and has 15 passing touchdowns. If he's able to stay healthy the rest of the season, he's going to shatter both of his previous career highs. On the ground, Sanders has also rushed for over 350 yards with 8 rushing touchdowns. Sanders has 23 total touchdowns on the season, which is the most in the entire Big 12. It's also number 7 in the entire country as well. This past weekend, in an impressive victory over Texas, Sanders completed 34 passes and threw for 400 yards and 2 passing touchdowns. Cracking the top 10 for the first time this season is Wake Forest quarterback Sam Hartman. Hartman missed the beginning of the season, and many people weren't even certain if he'd suit up this year, but he has, and he's been excellent for Wake Forest. In 6 games, Hartman has thrown for 1,800 yards with 21 passing touchdowns and only 3 interceptions. After emerging as one of the better quarterbacks in the country last season, Sam Hartman has been even better for Wake Forest this year. This past weekend against Boston College, Hartman threw for 300 yards with 5 passing touchdowns while rushing in a score as well. It was the 3rd game this season in which Sam Hartman has thrown at least 4 touchdown passes in one game. It was also his 4th game in which he threw for at least 300 yards as well. We have another quarterback who cracks my top 10 for the first time all season, and it's LSU quarterback Jayden Daniels. Now, I will say I was completely wrong on Jayden Daniels. This offseason, I talked numerous times about how I didn't think Daniels would thrive with LSU. As an Arizona State fan and someone who watched every snap of his ASU career, I thought he just wouldn't do well in the SEC, but he's proved me wrong. So far this season, Jayden Daniels is completing 70% of his passes. He's thrown for 1,800 yards with 12 passing touchdowns and only 1 interception. On the ground, he's rushed for over 500 yards with 9 rushing scores. And after losing their first game of the season, he's helped LSU win 6 of their last 7 games. This past weekend against Ole Miss, he threw for 250 yards with 2 passing touchdowns, while rushing for 120 yards with 3 rushing scores. The previous week on the road at Florida, he threw for 350 yards with 3 touchdowns, while rushing for 50 yards and 3 rushing scores. He's one of the best dual-threat quarterbacks in all of college football, and he's easily the most surprising quarterback for me in 2022. TCU continues to win, and Max Duggan continues to put up electric numbers for the Horned Frogs. This season, he's completing 69% of his passes for 1,900 yards. He's thrown 19 touchdowns and has only 1 interception. On the ground, he's rushed for 300 yards with 4 rushing scores. His passing efficiency rating of 181.8 is the best in the Big 12 and the 5th best in the FBS. In TCU's come-from-behind victory against Kansas State last week, he threw for 280 yards with 3 passing touchdowns. Duggan now has at least 3 passing touchdowns in 5 of his last 6 games. Once again, Alabama quarterback Bryce Young is having a solid season, but he has taken a step back from his Heisman winning campaign from last season. He's completing 66% of his passes for 1,900 yards. He's thrown 18 touchdowns with 3 interceptions. On the ground, he's added 140 yards with 3 rushing scores. This past weekend, in a top 25 win over Mississippi State, he threw for 250 yards with 2 passing touchdowns. Again, Bryce Young is having a really solid season, but his numbers aren't quite what they were last season, and there have just been a handful of quarterbacks that have been better than him this year. Here's where Caleb Williams comes in. He's completing 64% of his passes and is thrown for 2,000 yards. He has 19 passing touchdowns to only 1 interception. He's also rushed for 230 yards with 3 rushing scores. Williams is having a solid season, and his most recent game was actually his best of the year. Against Utah, he threw for nearly 400 yards with 5 passing touchdowns while rushing for 60 yards. But the Trojans lost to the Utes, and it was their first loss of the season. Had USC been able to pick up the victory against their first tough opponent, I would have had Caleb Williams inside my top 2 or my top 3. But the fact he lost his biggest test of the season certainly hurt him just a bit. But like I mentioned, although he lost, he still put up some really solid numbers, so I have him still inside the top 5. There are a number of running backs who you can make the case have been the best running back in the entire country this season, but based on their numbers and how their team is performing, Blake Corum has been the best in my opinion. In 7 games, he's rushed for over 900 yards with 13 rushing touchdowns. He's number 2 in the Big Ten in rushing yards, but he's number 1 in the entire country in rushing touchdowns. After a pretty slow start to the season by his standards, he's really turned things around over his last 5 games. This past weekend, in a very impressive victory over Penn State, he rushed for 166 yards with 2 rushing scores. This now makes his 4th consecutive game with 125 rushing yards and his 7th consecutive game with a rushing touchdown. It was also his 3rd game with at least 2 rushing scores. Like I mentioned, there have been some other really good running backs who may be deserving of being in the top 10, but when it comes to numbers and Michigan being ranked inside the top 5, I got Blake Corum this high. Yet again, Bo Nix continues to climb up my rankings as he's now number 3. He has been fantastic for Oregon this season, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but Bo Nix has been one of the best players in all of college football this season. For the Ducks this season, he's completing a career high 71% of his passes. He's thrown for 1,800 yards with a career high 17 passing touchdowns. Meanwhile, on the ground, he's rushing for 8 yards a carry for 400 yards and 8 rushing touchdowns. He leads the Pac-12, averaging 8 yards per carry, and is 3rd best in the entire FBS. His 25 touchdowns responsible for are the most in the Pac-12 and the 5th most in the country. Bo Nix has had a number of incredible performances this season, but this past weekend against number 9 UCLA might have been one of his best games. He threw for 285 yards, completing nearly 80% of his passes. He threw 5 passing touchdowns and added 50 yards on the ground as well. I talked about him this offseason as being a sneaky Heisman contender by being with the Oregon Ducks, but I didn't think that through the first 2 months of the season, Bo Nix would be better than I could have expected. Hendon Hooker stays at number 2 as Tennessee is ranked number 3 in the country. In 7 games for the Vols, he's completing 70% of his passes for 2,100 yards. He's thrown 18 passing touchdowns with only 1 interception. He's also added 3 rushing scores as well. Hooker is averaging 10.8 passing yards per attempt, the most in the entire nation. His passing efficiency rating of 190.8 is the highest in the SEC and the 2nd highest in the nation. He had a pretty easy game last weekend against Tennessee Martin, in which he threw for 300 yards with 3 passing touchdowns, but it was his performances earlier in the season against Alabama, Pittsburgh, and Florida that really have him in the Heisman discussion. I mean, still, thinking about that Alabama game, he threw for 400 yards with 5 passing touchdowns against the Tide. But staying at number 1 is Ohio State quarterback CJ Stroud. So far this season, he's completing 70% of his passes for over 2,000 yards. He's thrown 28 touchdowns with only 4 interceptions. He's number 1 in the country in passing efficiency rating at 203.9. I say this every week, but CJ Stroud is going to continue to be my number 1 pick until he has a dud of a game. Or even if he doesn't have a dud, it's going to take a lot from some of the names behind him to pass him up. Well, those are the 10 players I currently have in my Heisman race. Was there a player that was ranked too high or ranked too low, or a player that I didn't mention that should have cracked this list? Wherever you think it is, let me know in the comment section down below. Before you leave, don't forget to smash that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you love college football, this is definitely the place for you. Also, don't forget to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm and helps share the video with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.